Everybody says, I climbed Everest. Wrong. It is Sherpas who climb. It is Sherpas who take us to the Everest.
For more than a century, Western climbers have hired Nepalese Sherpas to do Mount Everest's most dangerous work, which is installing ladders across crevasses, fixing ropes, and making ice routes up to higher camps. This, unfortunately, put Sherpas in an unavoidable risk of injury and death at all times. With a total of over 300 deaths in the last century on Mount Everest, 40% of those have been Sherpas. It's a job that pays well in a poor region, but there may be no service industry in the world that so frequently puts its workers at risk for the benefit of paying clients. The dead are often forgotten, and their families are left with very minimal compensation. This is exactly what happened in 2014, when Mount Everest was hit by one of its biggest disasters.
The deadliest disaster on Mount Everest.
Tremor has caused the worst disaster ever on the mountain.
It was deadly, especially for the group that makes all of the climbing possible, the Sherpas. The incident happened on the south side of Mount Everest on April 18th. Around 6:45 at the Everest base camp, over 100 Sherpas were getting ready to serve their clients to pass the Khumbu Icefall, a segment known as one of the most dangerous mountain sections in the world. The Khumbu Icefall is a glacier that moves 1 meter a day, opening large crevasses with little to no warning. The constant movement makes Khumbu Icefall more prone to avalanches, putting the lives of Sherpas at risk. Every year, a small specialized group of Sherpas called Icefall Doctors are held responsible for clearing the path through the Khumbu Icefall. This is essential as the route to the summit goes from here. Sherpas go through the Khumbu Icefall 30 to 40 times a season, so they can carry climbing equipment such as oxygen bottles, tents, and food to the higher camps of Everest, and eventually help their clients reach the summit. For foreigners, crossing the Khumbu Icefall section can take up to 12 hours. Sherpas can do it in 2 to 3 hours, while carrying backpacks of up to 140 pounds. During the 2014 season, when the Sherpas were preparing ropes and ladders to climb through the Khumbu Icefall, a large serac block broke off from the west shoulder. This caused an ice avalanche, which injured 9 people and took the life of 16 people, which all were the Sherpas. The avalanche of 2014 is still the event responsible for the most Sherpa deaths. You may wonder, why do the Sherpas still put their lives at risk after disasters like this? Is it due to their extreme passion for mountains and climbing, or is there another reason? As of 2023, Nepal is issuing more permits to Everest than ever before, leading to more climbers climbing Mount Everest and unfortunately more Sherpas having to risk their lives. To understand why Sherpas are ready to take on these big risks, we have to go a bit back in time. Before mountain climbing became popular in the Himalayas, the word Sherpa meant people from the east. They were simply the people who migrated from eastern Tibet to Nepal in the early 16th century. While the Sherpa word originates from an ethnic group of people, nowadays it's quite commonly used to describe high-altitude workers and porters. The ethnic Sherpas established themselves in the mountains of Solukhumbu Valley in Nepal, with the oldest community at Pangposh village. For centuries, Sherpas carefully traveled around the mountains rather than passing over them. They didn't want to actually summit the mountains since they were believed to be the homes of gods. The Sherpa people call the highest mountain in the world Chomolungma, which translates to Mother Goddess of the Earth. Mountains are not just objects for them, they are places where deities reside. To this day, every time before expeditions go up, Sherpas do a puja ceremony to appease the deity and make sure everyone is happy with climbing. When Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay reached Mount Everest summit for the first time in 1953, Western climbers started finding their way into Khumbu. The year 1955 marked the end of Tibetan civilization and Western education started in the Khumbu region. With this came a shift in thinking. From avoiding summiting the mountains, the Sherpas started viewing them as an opportunity to support their families. The mountains became the livelihood for many locals. Thinking about it from their perspective, many of the locals didn't have any other choice but to make a living by working on the mountains. Young Sherpa children learn mountaineering skills because of the known expectation of working in the mountains. Their parents may not have enough funds to provide their children with traditional schooling. It's a never-ending cycle for the locals. When a high-altitude mountaineering Apa Sherpa's son was asked why his dad works so hard on the mountains, he replied, "It's all for education. Both my dad and mom were deprived of education, so he worked hard in the mountains." Kamarita is a Sherpa who holds the world record for the most Mount Everest summits, with a total of 26 times. When asked about his earnings, he mentioned that they are barely enough to cover the expenses of his family of 4. He discouraged his sons from becoming Sherpas because of his own hard journey. Instead, he was able to cover his children's education costs. Many of the Sherpas don't recommend the same path for their children because of the dangers included. If something happens to you in the mountains, there is very little safety net for the Sherpa family. In the 2014 Mount Everest disaster, the families of the dead Sherpas received barely enough money to cover funeral expenses. Even though Sherpas make more than the national average income, the question remains, are they paid too little for the risks they take? After all, being a high-altitude Sherpa is a job that is proven to be the deadliest profession in the world, with a fatality rate of 1.2%. With Nepal issuing more permits to Everest than ever, Sherpas are facing even greater risks as a result of overcrowded mountains. Is there a need for change?